Hi, everybody. My name is Devan McLaren, and today we're going to be walking through some key revenue forecasting concepts, such as price compression and market saturation. These are two really critically important concepts to understand because they will impact your license in New York State, and they will definitely have an impact on the way you want to run your business and plan ahead for your business. So, without further ado, again, my name is Devan McLaren. I am the founding partner of Triple Beam Advisors. I'm also the vice president of our academy, a 501c3 nonprofit that supports entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry with executive mentorship, training, free resources, and much more. So today, we're going to be walking through a couple key course objectives. We're going to talk about the laws of supply and demand, which, if you've taken an economics course, this is 101, the very first thing that you're going to learn. We're going to talk about things like price compression and the mechanisms that drive it. We'll talk about trends of cannabis product pricing post legalization and look at some other markets and how this has changed in those markets and what we could potentially expect to see in New York. We're also going to review factors driving price compression in the cannabis industry. Why does this occur? What might cause it to be more aggressive or less aggressive in different markets? We'll be reviewing implications of price compression for you and your business and how this is going to very specifically and directly impact you and your license type. And we'll be reviewing case studies involving price compression to give a little bit of a real world example on how this could impact your business. Throughout this course, you're going to be watching a few video lectures, and then there will be some interactive exercises as well. At the end, you should be able to understand and speak to these concepts clearly, and you should be able to plan a lot more effectively for your business to protect it from these types of things, which could impact your business a year in or 2 years in, but you're going to want to prepare for them today. Being able to understand price compression is really key if you want to be a successful entrepreneur in the cannabis industry. And understanding these fluctuations of the prices of the goods that you're going to be selling every day is going to be really critical to your business's revenue generation. So we're hoping that this course will arm you with the knowledge to understand how price compression could impact your business and how to proactively plan for its mitigation. So first, we're going to jump into a summary of supply and demand. These are two forces that are going to effectively determine pricing in a market for any good or service. So any industry you can think of, any product that you're selling, supply and demand are going to determine what the price is of that product. Supply refers to the quantity of a good or service that producers are willing and able to offer for sale at various prices during a specific period. So factors such as production cost, technology, regulations, and market competition will influence supply levels in the cannabis industry. Demand, on the other hand, refers to the quantity of a good or service that customers are willing and able to purchase at various prices during a specific period. Customer preferences, income levels, advertising efforts, and demographic shifts are among the factors influencing demand in the cannabis industry. Now that we understand sort of high level what these are, let's talk about some of the interactions between supply and demand, because that's what's really going to drive the price setting that we're talking about here. The interaction between supply and demand is shown on this graph here. So supply fluctuations in the cannabis industry can heavily influence pricing dynamics. When supply exceeds demand, then prices tend to decrease because of increased competition against suppliers. Conversely, when demand outstrips supply, prices typically rise as suppliers can command higher prices for their products. It's crucial for business owners to stay attuned to supply fluctuations in the market to anticipate potential changes in pricing. Demand trends, on the other hand, will play a significant role in shaping pricing strategies. Understanding consumer preferences, purchasing behavior, and market trends allows business owners to adjust their pricing accordingly. For instance, if there's a surge in demand for a particular cannabis product, businesses may adjust prices upward to capitalize on the trend. Conversely, if demand decreases for certain products, businesses may need to lower prices to stimulate demand, and remain competitive. By understanding the interplay between supply and demand, cannabis business owners can make informed decisions about pricing, inventory management, and market positioning to effectively navigate the complexities of the industry and achieve sustainable growth. So, the way that you might think about this in practice is if you have a competitor that moved in 5 blocks away from you, they're selling a very specific product that you also have on your menu, but they're selling it for a couple dollars less, then you might be incentivized to reduce the price on that product in your own store to drive up supply, to drive up demand. So the way that this might work in principle is if you had a competitor move in near your store that was offering a product for $1 less than you were, you may want to reduce your pricing to be able to compete with that other store. So reducing your price would increase the demand along the supply curve. And there are lots of really good resources online to understand supply and demand and work through these types of charts if you're a visual learner. These are simple concepts, but understanding how they interact with each other is really the key. The next concept we're going to talk about here is price elasticity. So now that we've been introduced to the general concept of supply and demand, we can start learning some terms that help us better define how supply and demand will impact product pricing. We discussed how supply and demand can change as prices go up, demand goes down. As prices go down, demand will go up. But how do we measure how they change in response to different business factors or for different goods? Let's start by defining two key terms: price elasticity and price compression. First, we'll talk about price elasticity. So what if a price decreases a lot, but the demand only goes up a little bit? Or what if prices go down a lot and then the demand skyrockets? This is what we're referring to as elasticity. The sensitivity in pricing to changes in demand or supply for buyers and sellers can either be elastic or inelastic. How I like to think about elasticity is like a rubber band. So if a rubber band does not stretch very much, it's inelastic. If it stretches a lot, it's elastic. The same principle applies for prices. If a price moves and demand does not change, then it's inelastic. If a price moves and demand does change, then it's elastic. Price elasticity of demand is a variable that effectively represents the percentage of change in the quantity demanded or how much consumption there is of a product divided by the percentage of change in price, shown by this formula here. As prices rise, whether consumers consume more or less or just the same amount will determine its price elasticity. For example, if price elasticity is greater than 1, the good is elastic, and if it's less than 1, it's inelastic. Now, the math and the formulas, you don't necessarily need to understand this. You just need to understand what does this really mean in practice. So the availability of a substitute for a product will affect its elasticity. So if there are no good substitutes for the product, then the demand is unlikely to change when the price goes up, making it inelastic. A really good example of this is a luxury good. If you are in the market to buy a Birkin bag, there's very few things that you would take in exchange for that bag, or a Ferrari, a specific type of Ferrari. These are inelastic goods. They can really control the price. They can jack it up a lot or reduce it a lot. It's not really going to change the demand because the buyers for that specific type of product are going to buy it regardless of whether it's a little bit more money or a little bit less. Luxury goods are a very good example of inelastic goods. An example, on the other hand, of elastic goods would be something like eggs or bread. So if you have 5 different brands of eggs on the shelf and one brand reduces their prices, you're much more likely to just jump and buy the other egg brand instead because it's cheaper and the comparison between those two products is very minimal. And so that's something that we would think about as price elasticity. Very small changes in price drive big changes in consumer purchasing habits. So by and far, cannabis products are going to be much more price elastic. The cannabis consumer is by nature, in every market that we've studied, very, very price sensitive, and there are a lot of different products to choose from that are roughly similar. So the more you would move up the curve towards premium priced products, really high quality eighths, for example, if you're selling the highest, most premium, there's less alternatives for people to buy. And so that might have a little bit more inelasticity. But if you're buying something that is, your typical $10 pre-roll, there's a lot of different options to choose from. They're not going to be all that different besides the brand. And so small changes in those can really drive buyer behavior. So we're going to stop there. And in the next presentation, we're going to walk through what is market saturation. And this will really help us solidify our understanding of what's going on in New York and what we can expect to see in New York as the market continues to change and evolve. I'll see you over there. Hey everybody, welcome back. The next concept that we're going to talk about is market saturation and how this has a major impact when you're trying to forecast revenue for your business. Understanding where the market is that you're operating in relation to the saturation timeline is going to be really critical for you. So what is market saturation? This is when the demand for a product in a specific market has peaked, meaning that potential customers already have a convenient supplier for a product and that there may be limited growth in that area. And so typically in these types of markets, you're going to see a lot more competitive environment. You're going to see people cutting prices. You're going to see a lot of different things that we'll get to in a minute. In the cannabis industry specifically, this is typically where legal markets have been around for a while. So cultivation licenses, manufacturing licenses, even retail licenses, there may be more relative to the number of consumers in these markets, meaning that that competition is really high. And when there's a saturated market, it's difficult for new operators to come in because potential customers, most of them have already established different licenses that they're going to regularly shop from. So those customers may be, it may be the retailers buying from the cultivators. It could mean customers coming into a retail shop. This is across the whole supply chain. It affects every single part of it. This is not just a retail level phenomenon. This is definitely something that we're going to need to understand for every license type. So let's dig into a few of the key characteristics here of a saturated market. Number one, we're going to see very high competition. This is the most important one. So if there's a bunch of different businesses offering the same product or similar products, they're going to be competing for those same customers. That's just the bottom line. If there's very few new customers coming in, that's going to contribute to that market saturation as well. So think about the cannabis market. There are still a good number of customers that are coming from illicit markets into legal markets. But for the most part, if a market's been around for a few years, the legal recreational market, most of those consumers are already participating in that market. So there's not a lot of new customers happening. Another characteristic of these types of saturated markets is price pressure. So when you have high competition, the best way to compete is to lower your prices and by nature of that, take lower profit margins. We will also see a need for innovation in saturated markets. You have to really get creative. You got to come up with new features or certain benefits or exclusive offerings that will attract attention. This is one other way that you can try to compete other than price pressure. The last characteristic here that we're going to look at is expansion or diversification. So once this market actually achieves that saturation point where we start to see some of these other characteristics above, then we're going to see different companies try to either expand into new markets or bring new products to the existing market. And this kind of diversification is going to be necessary to be able to continue to survive and thrive in your current market. So each of these points will highlight a key aspect that makes market saturation challenging, but also calls for a strategic adaptation for your business. That leads us into the next concept that we want to talk about today, which is price compression. This is specifically extremely important in the cannabis industry. So what is price compression? This is when supply and demand, going back to that chart that we looked at earlier, work to lower pricing. So we would call this decrease in price compression. So if in the cannabis industry we see a downward trend in product prices, that would lead to lower profit margins. And then as competition intensifies and supply, meaning the number of available cultivation licenses that are active, for example, or manufacturing licenses, or even retailers, as that supply outpaces demand, what we'll see is that prices will get compressed to lower levels, which poses challenges for a business that's aiming to maintain profitability. Thinking about this in practice, if you have a cultivation and there's a bunch of other cultivation licenses in your area, you're all competing on that price per pound. Think about a wholesale price per pound. So as each one starts to cut their prices lower to become more competitive for the buyers, that price on the whole is going to get pushed down, which means that you're all taking hits on your profit margin when that occurs. There's a few different factors that drive price compression, specifically in cannabis, more than any other industry that's out there. And part of the reason is because cannabis is such a brand new industry. This has really popped up in this grand scheme of things very recently. And so what happens is when you have supply chains that are still a little bit clunky, they're still learning, everybody's trying to figure out how to optimize their supply chains. As those supply chains continue to improve, as we get better at what we do, we get better at growing, our yields get higher, our distributors get more efficient. As that starts to happen, people will be able to lower their profit margins to compete, and that's going to happen when prices are coming down. Specifically in cannabis, we have the illicit market. So there's a huge amount of price pressure to compete because of the illicit market. The illicit market does not have taxes to pay. They don't have compliance costs to carry. And so because of that, they're able to offer products that are, albeit not necessarily tested, right, and not coming with the same protections, but they are offering those products which are competitive to the legal market and comparable in a lot of cases. Two, we have a very regulatory environment, which means that there's a limited number of licenses that it's hard to actually achieve those licenses, hard to get them. And then additionally, the way that licenses are typically issued, they're kind of released in batches, and we don't really know how many of those licenses are going to become operational or when. And what this can do is it can drive price compression because there could be a whole bunch of different licensees that get active around the same time. And the state has to issue licenses to make sure that there's enough stores that are getting open or cultivators that are growing, but they're not going to have perfect information. And there's a bit of a lag time between when licenses are issued and when they're going to become operational. What that can do is it can create issues where suddenly one day you wake up and there are way too many operators in the market, and that market becomes saturated, as we talked about, and everybody starts competing on price, and then price compression will occur. So you can see here an example where in California, you used to be able to get $1,500 a pound for flower that was grown in California for this is like outdoor or light depth flower. In the span of just a few years, that was cut down to $500 a pound. So if you can think about this as losing 1/3 of your revenue if you're a grower, that's a decrease in revenue by literally down to a third of what it was. And then by nature of that, unless you're also reducing your operating costs by that same factor, you're probably seeing a massive decline in your profit margin as well. So looking at markets like California that have gone through this market saturation, they've experienced what it looks like to have too many licenses, too many square feet of canopy to supply the market that they're in. That kind of price compression is very common. It's happening in every single legal market that we've seen, and it will happen in the market that you're operating in, without a doubt. So it's something that we definitely need to prepare for and really just have our wits about us and make sure that when we're doing our budgeting, we're planning effectively and we're not expecting prices to stay where they are. We're expecting them to go down. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next session, where we get into this in practice and some of the tools and tips that we can use to make sure that we can drive a successful business that can actually be sustainable. So I'll see you over there. We'll talk about that up next. Thank you. Hey, welcome back. So, in this third and final part of the key revenue forecasting concepts course, we'll talk a little bit more about how we can prepare your business for market changes like the ones that we've just discussed. So, thinking about the long term effects of market maturity and how this impacts pricing dynamics can be very complex, but we're going to break it down into simpler concepts so that it's really easy to plan and follow along. Price pressures in the cannabis industry are driving businesses across the country towards consolidation. And so, as businesses seek to enhance the economies of scale and strengthen their competitive position, consolidation will allow these companies to streamline operations, reduce costs, and mitigate the impact of price compression on profitability. Consolidation can reshape market dynamics and competition in the cannabis industry. So while larger companies gain additional market share and dominance, smaller companies could face increased competition and challenges in maintaining market relevance. So understanding the implications of industry consolidation is crucial for businesses to navigate effectively in a compressed pricing environment. As price compression becomes more prevalent in the cannabis industry, businesses face significant challenges in maintaining profitability. Decreasing profit margins due to downward pressure on prices can increase the amount of overall revenue and sustainability risks. While price compression may persist due to increased competition, market stabilization and consumer maturity offer opportunities for businesses to optimize pricing strategies and capture market share more effectively. Additionally, over time, the illicit market tends to erode as consumers favor the safety, ease of access, and consistency of legalized products. Understanding the interplay between supply and demand is essential for cannabis business owners to navigate pricing dynamics effectively. So, by staying attuned to supply fluctuations, demand trends, and the competitive landscape, the number of people that you're actually competing with, businesses can develop resilient pricing strategies that drive sustainable growth in the industry. However, market maturity also presents opportunities for innovation and growth, allowing businesses to adapt their pricing strategies to changing market dynamics. To mitigate the impact of price compression on revenue, businesses must implement strategic measures. So, this next session will discuss how you can combat price compression in your business and really protect it for the long run. So we said that understanding price dynamics is crucial for businesses in cannabis to thrive in a competitive market. So business owners should assess the competitive landscape carefully and consider factors above and beyond price, such as product quality, branding, and customer service, optimizing operational efficiency, diversifying product offerings, and differentiating your brand in the market. Implementing innovative pricing strategies can help maintain profitability amidst market pressures and differentiate a business from their peers. So, breaking these down individually, we have product quality. Cannabis products are often artisanal or craft, like wine or spirits. And so, government regulations that are in place will ensure that the safest product is created for the average consumer. Above and beyond creating a safe product, that's where your brand can differentiate itself. By making it clear that your product's unique or limited, your customers can be a lot more likely to return and be protected against market pressures. The next thing that we can do is focus on branding and marketing. Market differentiation is essential for a business to stand out in a competitive landscape. And by having that effective branding, you're not only going to attract customers, but you're going to create a perceived value beyond just price. That'll create a stickiness. So if you're able to create value beyond price, that's going to be key to attracting and retaining customers in a compressed market. Businesses can focus on factors such as customer experience, sustainability initiatives, or the uniqueness of the product to differentiate themselves and build that brand loyalty. And this can occur at the retail level. This can occur at the cultivation level of manufacturing. So we touched a little bit on this one, but focusing on customer service and workforce development can be another really good way that you differentiate your business from your peers. So if you think about your common corner store or boutique spirits or wine shop, that is a business that is built on service. People come back to that store because they know that they're going to have a quality experience because they're going to help you find the product that you need. Really trying to embody that in cannabis will be important because it is a complicated product. There's a lot of education necessary. And so having a knowledgeable guide about your first steps into this industry can really have a lasting impression on customers. So businesses can proactively prepare for price compression by equipping bud tending to staff or sales staff with techniques that maximize the customer interaction and build in the trust necessary to buy quality legal products. So this could include upselling to higher value items or implementing effective marketing strategies. Businesses need to adapt to price compression to be able to maintain profitability. It means that as you get prices that are going down and down, you may need to therefore sell more product to be able to make up for it. All right, so what we want to talk about next is building these types of concepts into your financial forecast. So you need to be able to be honest with yourself about the fact that price compression and market saturation either are here today already or will be here very soon. And the way that you can approach this is, number one, being always conservative in your forecast. If you watch the last course on Pro Formas 101, you're going to know this already. Being conservative in your forecast is critical. That includes ones that you're showing externally to investors, for example. It also includes ones that you're using internally to manage your business. You do not want to forecast a business that sees prices increasing over time or remaining flat in cannabis. It would be dishonest or worse, just not informed. And so if you are building out a forecast that's going out more than a year, you need to be able to expect to see, for example, if you're a cultivator, expect to see the price per pound for flower go down. And that is just a direct function of everything we've talked about today. More and more competitors competing for the same stores and driving down their prices to be able to win that business. And that is going to happen here. It's happened everywhere else. So you need to predict and forecast that price per pound, or if you're a retail store, that price per basket going down over time. Another one is really related, but you should not expect linear growth as a cannabis company. You're going to see some type of a curve. It's going to be some quick growth while people are learning about your business. You're gaining new customers. There's going to be some plateau point where you're going to kind of hit the top, and then you're going to start to see those sales go down, most likely, because there's so many other competitors that are coming in. Now, this is true today where we're at. It's 2025. We have still some growth in the market, but we are starting to see that the average, for example, retail store revenues are beginning to decline. I think that the supply chain above retail is a little bit lagged behind that. There's still a lot of room for people to grow there, but at some point in time, probably in the next year or two, we will see that flower supply begin to meet the demand. And if it exceeds it, we'll see prices continue to fall in New York. Another factor that we need to focus on here is by ensuring that your budget is supported at a lower revenue level. What do we mean by this? If you are planning your cultivation, for example, and you go out and you believe we're going to be able to generate $3 million of revenue because we're selling our flower for $1,000 a pound, then you're going to create a budget that's based on how much revenue you reasonably expect to earn. And that budget is going to cover things like staffing. It's going to cover your marketing expenses. It's going to cover all of your overhead, your rent, etc. But when you're making that budget, you do need to be cautious and you do need to plan for these things that we've talked about. So if you have $1,000 a pound today, and that's what you're basing your revenue forecast on, base your budget on the assumption that maybe you only get $800 a pound. And by building in that 20% decrease, you're preparing for the price compression that's expected to come around the corner. And you're going to be in a much better position to survive if that price compression or when that price compression comes. By preparing and budgeting and saving a little bit of extra, the worst thing that can happen is you're a year out and you realize we have extra money in the bank. Let's go put that towards marketing, or let's go put that towards differentiating ourselves in some other way. But you do not want to plan next year's budget based on the current situation for pricing on revenue. That's a trap that you need to be able to avoid, because we all understand that these changes are going to come to the market. We've talked about the average sale price decreasing over time. Working on performing a total available market analysis, this can help you understand where you are in the life cycle of a market. And so effectively, if you are early stage and it's a brand new market, and say we legalized today, you're not going to have to worry as much about that competition yet, because you're a first mover. You're coming into this market right away. You're experiencing a lot of that quick growth. And so building a TAM analysis will help you understand from the top down how many people are in this market, how many dollars are in this market. So what is the size of the cannabis market in New York, for example? And then you work your way down from that, and you focus on a specific area of customers. If you're a retail store, that might just be a circle around the store. Who's within 5 miles of my store? If there's people coming from the next state over, let's make sure that we're accounting for that. But what is the available market that people are spending, and then dividing that by the number of competitors that you have. Say there's 2 retailers in one county, and they're the only options for anybody in that county that's buying cannabis. You would look at the population of that county. You would reduce it down to how many people on average are above 21, and how many people that are above 21 consume cannabis. That's going to be your TAM. And then you would basically divide that by 2 to get to what the reasonable market size is for your specific store. You can do similar type of math if you're a cultivator and you're selling to other retailers. You can look at the number of active retail stores that are available in the state. You divide the total state market by the number of active retailers, and then you try to figure out how many of these retailers could I reasonably get into. Maybe it's 20%, 30%, 40%, and making sure that you have the ability to back up those assumptions. What this will do is it will help you understand just how competitive the market is. If there are, if there's 5 growers in a region that are all focusing on premium cannabis, for example, and there's 5 stores in that same region, you're going to be competing a lot, because you all need to sell to all of those stores to be able to survive. And if you're all focusing on premium flower, that's going to become an issue. You're going to have that price compression happen a lot faster. So that's where performing a TAM analysis, and you can look this up in more detail online, it's going to be really helpful in terms of understanding what is possible, what the market size looks like, and how to conduct yourself accordingly within that market. The last step here, really just bring in a financial forecaster who can focus on all of these things. Anyone that has that skill set that can build pro formas should have the ability and the foresight to look out for all these things in the market that you're in. So Triple Beam Advisors does this work for clients on a daily basis. Find somebody that has experience in cannabis specifically, because it is a very unique market, and find somebody that has done work in your state, because it does vary a lot state by state. But there are people available to help you. All right, we'll dig into a couple case studies in legal cannabis markets just to help explain some of these concepts in a really applicable way. So one example here that we can look at is the California distillate market. So with over a decade of legal cannabis sales to look at, being a cannabis entrepreneur in today's newly legalized market is like being part of Back to the Future. You can understand trends that happen when markets open to avoid running out of products or having to charge egregious pricing. A key market to analyze here would be California, which legalized in 2016 and issued their first licenses to operators in 2018. So we're going to be looking at supply and demand trends in one specific market, which is the THC distillate market. Distillate's a purified THC that can be combined with other cannabinoids and terpenes in order to mimic flavors or induce specific effects, with vaporization cartridges being mostly distillate and a top seller. Distillate is one of the key products in the cannabis market. So when legalization occurred, there was a major rush to produce distillate in California. It took a while to invest in setting up all the extraction labs And so the people who were first to market were able to demand very high prices, $4,000 plus per liter of distillate. So that type of pricing makes that business profitable for anyone. As long as you can get the lab up and running and make that type of product pricing per that product, you will make money, you will make profit. But what happened is more and more people piled into the business, ultimately leading the distillate pricing to crash to under $500 a liter. It's a big drop from 4,000 to 500. So what happened? A lot of distillate producers went out of business, and then the price of distillate increased again after that. So you can see this sort of curve that we've discussed, right? Where we created a new market and there was a huge demand, very high prices, very little competition. But as that competition increased, the price came down. Supply goes up, demand goes down, or stays the same. Price will slide down on that curve. Looking at the distillate market in California is interesting as well, because if you recall, there was what's commonly referred to now as Vapegate, where there were some issues with vape products that were made with harmful chemicals, and they were in the legal market. And so there was a while where a lot of people were very hesitant. People stopped smoking vapes for a while for fear that they were going to have harmful chemicals in there. And so basically there was one cannabis business that held a processing and manufacturing license that specialized in concentrates and vaping. And this is the way that they navigated these waters. When it came to distillate pricing, this manufacturing business from day one structured a future agreement with a distillate producer. The manufacturing partner asked for a guarantee for a specific amount of distillate to be delivered by next year, paying a portion up front in order to lock in a $1,000 per liter price, regardless of the price in the market the next year. This is called a future contract. The producer took in a lock at that $1,000 per liter price and used the down payment for that contract to build the lab. By the time that he was open and other producers could only sell at $500 a liter, he was still able to sell at $1,000 a liter because the company had steady supply and they had locked in this pricing already. So when it came to Vapegate, this company had a very close relationship with an investor that was able to quickly organize a bridge loan and keep that business afloat, largely because they had locked in that pricing. So what happened to the business in the long run? 2022 was bought for over $100 million. This is an example of how thinking ahead, planning effectively, reducing your downside or having downside protection can really protect your business, help it survive through a crisis that the rest of the market is going through at the exact same time. And you can, as long as you can survive, then you should be able to hit a good exit down the road. So we'll talk about a few key takeaways today, just to make sure that we're remembering all of these different concepts. One, you have to expect your prices to decline over time. This is happening in every legal market. If you're not expecting this, you're going in blind and you're going to get burned. And a big part of that is because we have to expect that competition will reduce your sales, at least temporarily. And when this occurs, businesses will shut down because not everybody is doing this. The reason that we're having this course, the reason we're having this conversation is because so many people do not consider these things. So by just watching this course today and thinking about these concepts, you're already having an advantage against a lot of your peers who aren't putting in the time and effort to understand these types of movements in the market and the way that it's expected to perform. Keeping conservative estimates can keep you safe. If you plan for a rainy day, if you save a little bit of money, it's always going to help you at the end of the day. Look at other markets for clues. There's tons of examples. There's a lot of markets that are, even though different in minor ways, a lot of similarities. We're seeing a lot of the same activity in markets that were legal many years ago. And we're starting to see that exact same pattern play out in states like New York that are a little bit more new. Financial forecasts are really complex, and the industry is going to be very nuanced and different from a lot of other industries. So make sure you find an advisor with experience both in finance and in the cannabis industry and specifically in your market. That'll help you really protect from a lot of potentially bad things happening. Thanks so much for joining. That's the end of our key forecasting concept course. Really hope that you found it entertaining and informative. We'll see you at the next course.